Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome to the University of Auckland Early Childhood Seminar Series. We'll begin our time together with karakia, me inoi tātou. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Professor Alison Clark, who is a Professor of Early Childhood Education at the University of South Eastern Norway. Alison's work developing the mosaic approach with Professor Peter Moss is well known in New Zealand, and more recently her work on slow pedagogy has drawn increasing attention. We are delighted to have Professor Clark with us to share her presentation, Taking the Longer View, Slow Practices and the Everyday in Early Childhood Education and Care and Higher Education. If questions arise for you during the presentation that you would like to ask Alison, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and she will respond to them at the end of her presentation. You can also use the chat function throughout the presentation to connect with each other and the panelists. After the seminar, a recording will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. I will now pass over to Dr. Amanda White to welcome and introduce Professor Clark. Kia ora, Amanda.
Kia ora. Thanks, Justine. Kia ora koutou katoa. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for the seminar this evening, Dr. Alison Clark. Alison is a Professor of Early Childhood Education and she works as an early childhood consultant. She currently has a post at the University of South Eastern Norway. Alison is a widely published academic who worked for many years with Professor Peter Moss at the Institute of Education, UCL London. Alison has most recently been involved in research and development projects around slow pedagogies with educators in Scotland and Iceland. And many of you will be familiar with her work, with her book, Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. So a very warm welcome to you, Alison, and thank you for beaming in to us in Aotearoa, New Zealand at what I believe is 8 AM in Orkney for you right now. And I'll hand over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Justine and Amanda, for that welcome. And it's a real privilege to be speaking to you today. So here we go. Taking the longer view, slow practices and the everyday in early childhood education and care, and also a little bit about higher education too. So I wanted to start by talking to you about this book. It's one of my favorite books. I wonder if you have a book that moves around with you. This one has survived a lot of house moves over the years. It was given to me on my first day of starting school at 5, and it's Layla Berg's book, Folk Tales for Reading and Telling. And I have very happy memories about this book because on the contents page, it lists the different chapters, the different folk tales in different parts of the world. And it has a column that says how long this chapter is going to take to read. And I distinctly remember having these chapters read to me, particularly by my dad, and the kind of joy of choosing a long chapter. So I'm going to be talking today about the relationship with time in early childhood education and care, and to think about how that the impact on our day-to-day practices on our research. So this question of time. This links into a quote I saw from Carl Honoré, who wrote a book called In Praise of Slow. And this is also about bedtime stories and the impact. He said, at the time, I'm locked in a nightly tug of war with my son, a 2-year-old son, who favors long stories, read at a gentle, meandering pace. Every evening, though, I steer him towards the shortest books and read them quickly. We often quarrel. You're going too fast, he says. Or as I head for the door, I want another story. Taking the long, languid stroll through the world of Dr. Seuss is not an option. It is too slow. And in Honoré's book, he talks about this sort of this was a wake-up call, really, when he realized how his feeling of hurry and rush was deeply affecting his relationship with his young son, and led him to think more about this relationship with time and connections with slow. And I think this is this has an impact across all of education, and early childhood education included. I think we have an impatient look, and this is a phrase from Geert Biester, the education philosopher, and I think it's very telling, an impatient look. So he says, I am inclined to argue that what we find is predominantly an impatient look. Not only do we find a desire to put as much world as possible into the child or student, we also found a desire to do this as quickly and cheaply as possible, to constantly monitor and measure the effectiveness and efficiency of the operation, to make teachers' salaries dependent on the extent to which they succeed in producing pre-specified learning outcomes. For me, there are some sort of rather dangerous phrases here in terms of the pre-specified learning outcomes, teachers' income being linked to results, and also this desire to do things to the whole drive to education to be that seen to be doing so as quickly and efficiently as possible. And Biester continues, he says, the impatience of society vis-a-vis the school is therefore a sign of society's inability to give a place to the fundamental complexity and openness of all educational processes and practices. That is the fact that all education always and necessarily entails a risk. And I think this takes us to the heart of this question about the relationship with time in education. Are we comfortable with uncertainty and with risk in terms of not always knowing where the learning is going to go? And this links into Biester's book on the beautiful risk of education. So this led me to my most recent work around slow pedagogies, looking at some of the alternatives that we already know were there, and are there in many different countries and in different cultural contexts, but in question of how to give them more visibility and how to make more conscious efforts for thinking about how we're working with time, particularly with young children. This is a phrase from Hartmut Rosa, the German sociologist, in his book Resonance. And he is also very interested in this relationship with time and the question around acceleration and where that's got us. And he talks about, we must run ever faster in order to maintain our place in the world. And this seemed to me to have a very strong echo with what I sometimes find within early childhood education, but also within higher education in many different contexts. This feeling that you can never quite do enough. You're always running in order to maintain your place in the world. And so this led me to my 2-year study that took place during the pandemic, started in 2020, and was funded by the Froebel Trust. And the Froebel Trust fund and support work in early childhood education and care and in research that is linked to Froebel's principles, thinking about the beginnings of the first kindergarten. And I called the study Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. And my attempts here it was to be a purposive study. So I was deliberately talking to people who I knew in the way that they were working and engaging with young children had a particular slower, less hurried relationship with time. It happened during the pandemic, and therefore I needed to switch and change how I was going to do things, no face-to-face. It led to a virtual reading group that kind of happened alongside the study, and then a focus group at the end with educators to discuss my initial findings. So these are my 2 key questions. Are we asking young children and those who work with young children to run ever faster to maintain their place and ours in the world? So that echo of Hartmut Rosa's phrase. But then I think importantly to look at, so what alternatives are there to be reclaimed, rooted in early childhood traditions, pedagogies and practices? And that word reclaimed has become increasingly important as I talk with many educators in different contexts. So this is not new, but this is about, I think, having confidence to reclaim some of the more sensible ways of working, going back to our early childhood traditions, pedagogies and practices. So the hurried child, this was a phrase that I first heard in discussion with one of my Japanese colleagues. And she was particularly concerned with the young children that she was encountering in her context in Kobe, in Japan. The pace of their lives, both in early childhood education and outside as well. So when I was talking with my participants across these 11 countries, it turned into a reflection really on different ways of engaging with children and how these various different policy changes had affected that. So this is Emma Dyer, who's a teacher and researcher in England. And she said, so I suppose there's this pressure in schools to perform and to be able to do certain things at certain times, hit certain milestones, certain points, but they're not necessarily developmental milestones. So children are supposed to be reading fluently by the age of 6 and writing because the curriculum is so heavily reading and writing led in England. It filters back and back further and further back. So that the idea of exploring slowly and doing all the sorts of things, doing a range of different things, I'm not saying it's gone, but then the pressure starts earlier and earlier. And so I think it filters back and back, I think, is a really telling phrase of how the kind of weight of education kind of sometimes crushes down on early childhood education and care and can squeeze the play out. And so I think part of this reclaiming and resisting is about holding on to that in our different contexts. So it filters back and back. And then what does that downward pressure, what does that lead to, and what do we lose? But this sense of hurry is also there with educators. So this was Karina Gervin, who was in one of my participants in the focus group, an early childhood educator. And she said, so you're trying your best, but then you've got all this different pressure. It may be from the local authority, it could be from the Scottish government, it could be anybody. And the tiny small fish, you're trying to fight back the bigger fish to say, no, you know, we're with these children, we've got the skills, we've got the knowledge, we've done the training, we know how to support these children. But ultimately, we are then almost forced to put them in boxes. And then when they get to school, it looks like those children aren't achieving when actually they are. So I think part of this discussion is about strengthening the strength of the tiny small fish. I think one thing that we can see happening is what can be seen as a proleptic organization of time. It was a new word for me, but I understand it to mean when we have this downward pressure, when the future overshadows the present. And when I heard that phrase, I thought, actually, I think that's what can happen so easily in early childhood education and care, when the future totally overshadows, so that actually the joy of the present, the possibilities of the present are overshadowed. So this came out of work by Jewett and Jones, who were working with older children in what would be secondary school in the UK. And they said the examination itself, a year or so away, was constantly drawn attention to the students through spoken reminders, through handouts, and through wall displays. In this sense, we can speak of a proleptic organization of time. The tasks of the lessons were described to students as anticipations of examination requirements. The final goal had a constant presence in the moment-to-moment activity of the lesson. So I think this overshadowing comes across very clearly in this passage for older children, but I think it can still happen with younger children too, where overshadows, it has a constant presence in the moment-to-moment activity of the lesson. And I think we can see that with the whole school readiness agenda and how that can totally overshadow and take over what's happening in the present. But another aspect of this, I think, is the pressure on the very youngest children, and in terms of what is seen as a valuable use of their educator's time. So this is Liz Turbot, early childhood educator, and who was also studying at the time. And she says, I think for me, especially working with babies, it's about just being, not moving on to the next thing. It's just enjoying what they're doing. And then she goes on to say here around having that time for nappy changing, for it to be about a relationship and not just a chore. But she says, but what is the next thing? There is no next thing. That's their day, and the longer they can spend, even a very young child, having their lunch in front of them. There's no hurry to get it into them. They need to explore it. They need to eat with their hands, if that be the case, but they need to just have time. But then these questions, I think, also spill over into higher education as well, in many different contexts, in my experience. So this idea of the hurried student and lecturer too. So this has led to some conversations with teacher educators of early childhood in different contexts. This is Biljana Fredriksson working in a Norwegian context. And this is her hope, really. She talks about the ability to focus on a few things rather than jumping from one to another, which has become the norm in her experience in curricular plans. There is so much to get through, so much to get through. In early years settings, in school or in university, there is a need to keep jumping within things too, checking the tasks that are finished. So you're not able to go into depth. So I believe it's more important, she says, to do a few things and to go in depth, and then learn what learning in depth is, and hopefully it will be possible to transfer that understanding. I think that's really interesting, that if students aren't having that experience of being able to learn in depth during their teacher education, and maybe haven't experienced it in their own childhood and experience through school, actually, are they going to be able to have the patience and the confidence to be able to support children's learning in depth? But this question around the relationship with time and hurry in higher education has been going on for very many years. I worked with Doreen Massey at the Open University at one point. And Doreen Massey wrote this editorial in 2002, several decades ago. And she was longing in this piece to have the time and maybe the confidence to worry away at something, to reread things, the work of others, not simply to find out what they say, but as moments in a longer, slower process of musing something over, to reread things, to go back to old material, maybe to rework it. The issue of having time to think is more than one of whether we can preserve a free afternoon here or there. It's more about the overall pace and atmosphere of things. It's about what is valued. So I think in Doreen's questioning here, she's sort of highlighting this very important link between how we spend our time, how we're allowed to spend our time, and about what is valued. So what is seen as a valuable use of our time, what is seen as a valuable use of children's time and of our students' time. So rethinking the relationship with time. In my initial study on slow pedagogies, there emerged these four interconnecting themes: being with, going off track, diving deep with children, and taking the longer view. And I wanted to talk just briefly in this talk around the being with particularly, and also to think about taking the longer view. And obviously this is just a taste of this work, so I hope it gives us some points for discussion, but won't cover the whole ground. So being with, this is actually a sculpture from the campus where I'm based in Norway. And I think it's a rather lovely image, mother with all her children. So I think this question of being with has a a very close association between the link between slow and care, being able to be in the moment with young children. This is a work of two American researchers, Soros and Madrid Akpovo. And they say, through slow care, we offer children care that is not judged but by its economic efficiency, but instead by its depth of connection and responsiveness. So again, we have this contrast with economic efficiency or depth, connection, responsiveness. And it's also about reprioritizing care as both an emotional and a temporal practice. Okay. Yeah, so care is an emotional presence and also care as acknowledgement. So there's two themes that they pull out in that article. When they talk about care as emotional presence, they say it's a connection of being in the moment instead of being distracted from them. So putting that person in full vision of, I'm here with you and I'm going to do these things. We're going to do these things together, which can apply across so many different practices in early childhood education and care. I'm going to be fully in this moment of being with, putting that person, that small person, in full vision. I'm here with you and I'm going to do these things. I'm going to do these things together with you. So there's care as emotional presence, and there's also care as acknowledgement, recognizing children's deep emotions and responding with care and warmth. So there are many people at the moment, and I think people on this call as well, who this will be very much at the heart of their own work and research. So I'm just pulling out a few commentators on this here. So this is Mitchell, Moore, Degotardi and Fleet, Elmer Fleet, talking about the epistemology of care. And this had several connections with some of the participants that I've been talking to around this being with. So they say this means that when one re-encounters an everyday experience, such as mopping the floor, folding washing, or serving lunch, the resonance of past moments persists. And through potentiality of the present, care is born in the moment. Moments offer us a way to re-examine the overlooked aspects of care. So in their work, they're drawing attention to the importance of these moments. And I love this description of the resonance of past moments persist, because I think it alerts us this question of, if we're thinking about the relationship with time, it's not just about the present. It has these temporal dimensions into the past and into the future, but not, as I was saying, in such a way that the future totally overshadows the present. So folding the bibs. Mitchell, Moore and colleagues talk around, have this little example of conversations with Christopher. Christopher was taking his time, pondering his decision. It was not that he did not know which feeding bib he wanted, but more that Christopher seemed to enjoy the process of choice. His finger firmly indicated the bib with the line print, and Beth, the educator, within the moment, warmly confirmed with him, "You'd like the lions, okay." So I first encountered this piece and I just thought it was a lovely encapsulation of being with the very youngest children. And then I realized that it actually chimes with a lot of work that, as I understand, that's been happening at the University of Auckland as well. So just one example, this is from Maria Cooper and Jean Racal's chapter that I discovered, Pedagogies of Care with 1-year-olds. And actually they draw attention to a similar example about folding bibs. So providing opportunities for infants to participate and contribute to their care routines also enables them to develop their identity as contributing members of a community that is inclusive of, yet broader than their family. In the New Zealand research, group meal times with peers provided one such example. The infants were invited to choose their own bibs from the small range provided, with teacher encouragement as well as support to put on their chosen bib. So I think in kind of tuning into these very fine details, you can see what a less hurried approach, tuning into children's rhythms, what it enables. And this is, I think, is a very important part of the conversation, what then becomes possible. As I say, this is not new, but I think it's a question of what to hold on to, what to reclaim, what to be able to challenge if time is being taken away from this. I think it's about unfolding, and this is what Cooper and Raquel also say. It is the destiny, this is quoting Froebel here, who talks about children's development as an unfolding. It is the destiny and life work of all things to unfold their essence, hence their divine being, to become fully, vividly and clearly conscious of his, and we will say her as well, essence, and to reveal it in their own life with self-determination and freedom. So this question of unfolding young children and unfolding is about allowing them the time to do so and to have that patience and confidence. It's also, as Cooper and Raquel say, such a profound idea can assist us in understanding how the essence of the infant unfolds as they become self-aware, self-knowing and self-determining in the context of their first connections and relationships with significant others. Another piece of work it links with is Caroline Gard's work, which is a recent PhD in England. And Caroline's work with educators working with the youngest children has identified what she calls as the importance of adagio moments, adagio interactions. So using a sort of musical metaphor to think about this. This is one of the educators in her study. It is the little bits that you have enabled me to see. It has been so good to remind myself that those little things matter and the little things I bring do matter. There is a lot of value in those, and I think I have probably overlooked them myself. They can be really short, fleeting things in a very, very long day, but they build up to a much bigger thing for those children who are here for a long time. I think that's very interesting because this educator is pointing to the length of the day too. So when we're talking about the relationship with time, actually when policies change and children in some contexts are coming to nursery for much longer days, actually we need to be even more aware about, are we making a valuable use of their time? And this conversation about slow and care and being with is also about taking the longer view, because it's around not always being drawn to the short-term immediate decisions. And there are many different aspects to taking the longer view, just to mention a few here. So this is another book that was written during lockdown as well by Richard Fisher, called The Long View, Why We Need to Transform How the World Sees Time. So in Fisher's work, he's also interested in how to move away from the dominance of short-term decisions that affect so many different areas. And yeah. So in taking the longer view, I think we can look at this question at many different levels. We can talk about it in terms of taking the longer view in terms of the purpose of education and early childhood education and traditions, and also in terms of educators' role and the challenge of short-term demands, and in terms of the pace, rhythm and depth of children's relationships and learning. And to take that last point, I think this connects with what Harriet Cafaro talks about, the importance of stretched time. So Harriet Cafaro, an American working with John Dewey's ideas for many years in an early childhood classroom, as she would call it in her context, and then did her PhD just before she retired. And she talks about non-fragmented stretches of time not only give children the opportunity for more in-depth involvement and experimentation, but also allow room for situations to evolve, to become meaningful in a way that they may not be at first glance. I think that neatly chimes in with the importance of children being able to unfold. Within this stretched time, greater possibility exists for making choices and for experiencing the consequences of one's doing. Such an approach requires that time be viewed as perspective, as rhythm, as opportunity, and that the present moment be fully valued. I think these are important items here, seeing time as perspective, as rhythm, as opportunity, what becomes possible and what isn't possible, and that the present moment be fully valued. So, what might a slow and patient early childhood education and care look like? And maybe this is the context in which you're working or researching, but in other contexts, it can be a real contrast. So these are some of the elements that emerge from my study. Could it be making time, place, and materials for children to explore what they think through play, create opportunities to deepen and extend children's learning through being with, and the important element of being able to revisit moments through pedagogical documentation, through learning stories, through ways of documenting that enable children to revisit and to return to go into depth. Make time to listen to children's ideas and experiences through a range of expressive languages. Prioritize time to listen to multiple perspectives from families and colleagues. Also this one of being a place of resistance, unafraid to encounter uncertainty and difference, and to challenge policies that sit uncomfortably with pedagogical principles. Gosh, when I look at that and just know a tiny bit about the New Zealand context at the moment, that seems to be quite pertinent. Be a place where taking the longer view is valued about children's lives, about education and the planet, because there is this other element about taking the longer view that is so in tune with Indigenous ways of knowledge about the need to protect our planet. Value the here and now and paying close attention to the present whilst recognizing children's past knowledge and experiences and their families' knowledge and experiences, and being mindful of their future. So these are some of the ideas that I'm taking into a new study to just mention briefly, which I'm calling Being Us, Learning and Living Together Through a Slow Pedagogical Lens. So this is a chance to work with three early childhood centres in Scotland in very different contexts, to work with educators to be able to look at the possibilities, to document the possibilities, and to hold on to them and reclaim them. Possibilities for young children, but also to look at the connection between these questions around the relationship with time and the well-being of educators. And I think there's a very close link, and we want to look at that in more detail. So it's not just about valuing children's time and how we're using it, but also what that then means for job satisfaction, for a return to more joy in the job, which I think is an increasing problem across early childhood contexts at the moment. So in my new study, we're going to be looking at this question of time as both a pedagogical and an ethical resource. Questioning, so what do we value and what is a valuable use of children's time? So it'll be a 2-year study, and the focus will be the relationship with time in early childhood education and care during a period of rapid societal change and uncertainty. So my driving question, what does a slow pedagogical approach to early childhood education and care make possible for children, educators, and then as learning communities as well? Because I'm interested in what this has to do with these collective memory as well, and what it means to be a learning community in a particular context. But does this have anything to say about universities? I think it does. Very contentious area, of course. So what would a slow and patient university look like? And I certainly haven't experienced one of those. I think this connects with a wonderful book that I discovered by Bolus Walker, Slow Philosophy, Reading Against the Institution. So Michelle Bolus Walker is one of many people writing at the moment about the slow university and the possibilities there. And I also follow the Slow Academic blog by Agnes Bosenkesh, the Australian, which is very worth engaging with. But Bolus Walker says, my interest is in a reading that comfortably returns time and time again to the same terrain, the same book, the same passage, the same title. To ponder its significance with all the benefit of unhurried time, the passage of time, and the silence and space this time affords. I read this as a very, very challenging paragraph. I mean, it unsettles me because I think it's so far from sort of everyday experience of what's possible. But I think this ability to be able to go back, to return to this, to the same piece of work, and sometimes to our own work and revisit it, feels very radical, but I think it's where we need to be heading. So this has led to another initiative, which is reclaiming the slow Nordic early childhood education network, which is just a project that's just about to begin as well. Exploration of the value of slow practices and early childhood education and care and teacher education across 4 Nordic countries. And again, this word reclaiming here is going to be very important in this piece of work as well. So to end with a couple of thoughts on patience. Patience, I think, sometimes can sound like it's a bit woolly, it doesn't have any strength to it, but I think patience can be resilient, a resilient, persistent, active, brave quality. I think there's room for this type of powerful patience in a timeful approach. So I think to be able to stand up for this powerful patience, I think, is a very important challenge. This is something that some colleagues in England are taking up at the moment. This is Nathan Archer and Alison Clark, who have been looking at resistance in early childhood education in different contexts. This emerged from one of their studies. It is like educators are just quietly getting on with what they know will motivate children and enable a kind of practice that promotes children's agency and entitlement to play. So resistances might be a way of educators hanging a sign on their classroom door that says business as usual, and that business is the business of play. Play matters to our youngest children. So in their work, they're kind of looking at where people are able to be below the radar, if you like, to enable children to carry on with the business of play. Or are we moving in this direction, which is in the direction of more and more ties on our time and structure and more structured living? I went to give a talk on slow pedagogies to this particular university in England. And when I rocked up to do it, I saw these banners all around the building, which was a glossy new chrome university building. And this was their logo for the that they'd chosen, never stand still. And I think it kind of encapsulated really some of the challenge of the present moment. So I'm going to end there. And there will be some references on these slides. And just to end with a deep thank you to those who are involved in my study, to the educators, to the children in Falkirk, Orkney and Shetland, where I've been working in different projects. Thank you.
Kia ora, Alison. Thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation, and it raises lots of thoughts and questions for me, and I'm sure that others may be keen to post some questions in the Q&A as well. But one of the things that I was thinking about first is that comment you made about slow care is not judged by economic efficiency. And I think, as you alluded to, you know, in New Zealand at the moment, there's quite significant policy shifts going on that are threatening to impact on how we might feel about quality of responsive ECE that puts children first, as opposed to that the view of market-driven or financial returns that I think is worldwide, but we are certainly experiencing that here at the moment. One question I had was when you mention slow Nordic networks and slow practices, just made me think about the role of culture in the countries that you've studied so far. And have you noticed cultural differences in terms of how teachers might engage with slow practices in different countries?
Yeah, I think it is deeply influenced by culture, and that was one of the things when I visited Australia and New Zealand in the autumn, and some of the conversations, for example, at University of Waikato, were around this question of context, and also, I think, just hearing a tiny bit around the importance in Maori culture of this question of unfolding and children's development, the link to the importance of whānau and caring for the planet. So I think this question lands differently in different cultural contexts, but I think there are also these other pressures. So I think this question of reclaiming maybe is the thing that is common, the need for reclaiming. But I think the historical roots and cultural roots will be different in different contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that idea of unfolding as well, slowly. There's a question here in the Q&A just saying, what's your advice with regards to advocating for this pedagogical approach within a teaching team heavily focused on school readiness? And I think a lot of people might be feeling that at the moment.
Yeah. Well, when I'm working with educators, I say firstly, find your allies, which might not be necessarily immediately where you're working, but find people who actually believe and value that have similar shared values to yourself. And then I think to be able to I use this phrase, lean into slowness, which is like not to say actually this can kind of totally come in and radically change a way of working, but where are the moments that you can enable a less hurried approach, and what then becomes possible, and demonstrating it. I think in terms of the whole school readiness debate, I think for me it hones in on, well, what are we missing when the whole emphasis is on what children are doing next, and how can we demonstrate the value of the present and what they're learning in the now in order to sort of prepare them in different ways. So I think children in going to school need to be able to work together, to have that kind of resilience, to have emotional strength, all things that they will be learning in early childhood. So yeah, it is a real challenge, but I think we need to stand up for and demonstrate what we are giving children when we work in a play-based way.
And it's a little bit like how you were talking about being a place of resistance in a way at many levels, isn't it? Because sometimes those questions come from parents too, around readiness and that pressure.
Yeah, and I think that question around parents too, I think it's about being able to sensitively communicate and confidently communicate the way in which you're working. And so in some of the slow pedagogy projects in Scotland, they have had open mornings when they have invited parents in to show them the way that they are engaging. And this might be very much part of everyday practice, or it might be a sort of an adapting a way of everyday practice. So in some of these Scottish settings, they were choosing to spend more time outdoors. And in order to do that, or through doing that, they also wanted to bring parents with them, if you like. And so they looked at, okay, how are we communicating these ideas? Can we invite parents in? And looking at how to be clear what the gains are.
Yes, absolutely. There's another question here. Could you speak a little about navigating behavioural expectations and boundaries within a slow pedagogy approach?
Yeah, okay. So I think that maybe comes to this question of being with. And it's not going to, it doesn't eradicate behavioral problems, but I think it raises questions around staffing as well. And if you have children who are coming in with particular behavioral issues, is there a way of giving that child more opportunities to engage in a practice that interests them? Is that to do with time? Well, I think it probably is. I think it's about, because it's a question of how we're using educators' time, what we're enabling children to do or not do. And I think it's also a question of looking at the environment as well. Is the environment one that enables children to experience a whole range of different pace? You know, so do we have the space where children can be have quieter, more sort of out of the way time, as well as the full-on bike time, for example? It's a very, very complex issue. I'm not sure I've answered that well, but yeah, that would be my initial starting points.
Yeah, and that time to notice and recognize, and the time to listen to, you know, but as you said before, it's so different across different contexts.
Yeah, and I guess if you as an educator have been given permission from your leaders, but also yourself, to be in the moment with children, maybe you might find out what the sparks are, what are actually the triggers for that behavior, and also the other way around, what actually will really engage this child.
Thank you. There's a comment here from Maria that, thank you, Alison. I've enjoyed the depth of your presentation. I love the idea of standing up for these ideas. I have learned a lot from babies and toddlers by allowing myself to be taken in by the moment, their moment, our moment. Thank you for these valuable ideas and reminders. That's from Maria Cooper. And another question from Helen Hedges, that you commented that the early years EYFS was heavily reading and writing led. Is this in a structured way rather than, say, the use of books, stories, signs and symbols we might draw attention to each day? And what does slow literacy look like?
Yeah, great question, Helen. Okay. I take that last point. So I have a chapter in my book looking at what's being slow with a book, because this was a question that came up talking with a teacher educator friend, and she said how to be slow with a book. So I think these questions of a slow pedagogical approach to literacy is really fascinating, and I think there are different ways in which to enable children to return and revisit a story that they love, for example. So I would see that this could be one way of thinking about a slow pedagogical approach to literacy. I give some examples of where the returning to a story has happened over a year. And there are some lovely examples from Vivian Gusson-Paley, the American educator and writer, where she sort of embraces one particular author's work and then looks at, over a very long time, with her group of children, his different stories and how they go into it as a class, as a group of children, in more detail. Another colleague, another participant in my study was Claudie Tull, and she looks at a repeated picture book way of reading. Again, this idea of enabling children to revisit. And in Claudie's work, one of the challenges was how to enable students to gain the skills in order to do that confidently. So rather than to rush through, to not feel like, oh, this is a waste of time, we've done this before, but to actually look at where children take an idea when they can return to it. I mean, I think a caveat would be, we're not aiming this to be boring. So, you know, we need to bring our imagination and our curiosity to this, and tune into children's imagination too.
And sort of extending interests over time, might be many weeks or longer, over long view.
Yeah. So I think that kind of stretching time with a book is quite an interesting one to explore.
Thank you. What's your opinion on the place of technologies within a slow pedagogy approach? And
Yeah.
firstly, do you feel there's a place for it, and how does it fit, if so?
Yeah, so I'm part of a master's course at the University of Edinburgh at the moment, and the majority of our students on that course are Chinese. We're having some really interesting conversations around slow pedagogies and technology as part of that. So I think this is not, slow pedagogies are not, and I think of these as an umbrella term. And I think there is a place to look at, well, how can technologies be used as a slow practice? And I think that's a whole important area to research. So I think there are ways in which digital technology could support children's exploration in depth and their revisiting, for example, through recording children making their own plays, then being able to revisit the play. So it can be a way of revisiting and stretching. So I think technology can be a help in creating more of these slow moments and this revisiting and going into depth. But there are also challenges, and it could be taken in a completely different direction. So I think we need to be able to demonstrate how technologies can support slow practices and what are the challenges.
Yeah, it's rapidly changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just got one other question here. I'll just check the Q&A. Could you talk a little bit about how you might build up a picture over time of children's abilities and interests, within a slow view? And if you have any tips around particular tools or ways that teachers might be able to record and document those strengths and interests and abilities?
Well, I think thinking about what I know about Tefariki, then I think actually there is the relationship with time is actually built into that, for those frameworks, and is there within learning stories. So I think there's a whole temporal dimension to working with learning stories that in a New Zealand context, you have a huge advantage, if you like. And I think Margaret Carr and Wendy Lee have written about this. It's kind of there within some of their writing around the relationship with time. And I think that's interesting to sort of pull that out. So I think documentation in a variety of forms can be approached in this way. I think key things here are children's involvement in the process. So can children actually sit, read, look again at what they've been documenting, what they've been interested in? So that's an very important aspect for me. And
children love to see themselves in their learning stories.
They do.
Yeah,
absolutely. And to be able to share them with friends and to be able to show them to parents. And I think that's so different from a very disembodied way of documenting that can be technologies, choosing to send a photograph home instantly, and then it's kind of lost. It's not part of a dialogue. It's not part of an ongoing conversation. So I'm more interested in these more embedded ways of documenting and of children's role in that process.
Yes, I'll just comment here, Justine, this relates to the idea of what is a good use of a teacher's time.
Yeah. So for example, in one of my talks, I learned about early childhood centre in another country, where one of the educators was working full time on taking the photographs and sending them home, and that was basically her role within the setting. So it raised a huge question for me around about her use of time, about the value of that, and what is gained and what is lost really in that process. So yes, it does absolutely tie in with what is seen as an educator, as a valuable use of educators' time, and how that needs to be a very conscious decision for leaders leadership within early childhood education. How are we choosing to use our time, and how could it be different, perhaps?
And it's going to be fascinating going forward to learn more about, you were talking about future research, looking at teacher wellbeing and the return to joy, you know, what that's like from a teacher's perspective.
Yeah, I think with huge problems in terms of recruitment and retention of educators across the world in many, many different contexts, I think this is why this is a timely conversation. You know, we need to look at the job, at what is being valued.
And I love that metaphor you spoke about, strengthening the strength of the tiny small fish.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah. Thank you. How are we going for time, Justine? Are we nearing the end?
A couple more questions, that would be absolutely fine. Otherwise,
I think we're pretty good. Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
Well, kia ora, Amanda, e ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Many thanks, Alison, for your presentation. The value of slowing down and being fully present with children and in our academic and our personal lives cannot be overestimated. And I'm sure that what you've shared this evening is going to be a source of ongoing reflection and discussion among our early childhood seminar series community as we consider further what it means to actually be unhurried and how slow practices can be protected, celebrated, and advocated for. Anō, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Many thanks to you, Alison. We appreciate your sharing with us. To our Early Childhood Seminar Series audience, if you wish to share or revisit this presentation, please check out our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. The recording of the seminar will be available in a couple of days. We look forward to seeing you again in July for our next online seminar. So keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. Thank you again for joining us today. We'll close with karakia. Ko mutu a mātou mahi, me mō tēnei wā. Manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi. Take good care, everyone. Ka kite anō.